Alright, YouTube, there will be links in the description for additional Fukushima information. There's still more happening. Of course, the typhoon that hit doesn't seem to have actually caused a meltdown. The chances of that were fairly low to begin with. The main worry is what TEPCO actually decided to do, that in order to prevent radioactive water during the storm, during the actual typhoon, from going into the ocean, they elected to put radioactive materials into the ocean. They started dumping a great deal of this supposedly diluted wastewater into the ocean. Now, looking at the past of TEPCO over the last couple of years, generally when they tell us that the radiation readings are one figure, it turns out to be a significantly higher second figure that's actually true, as borne out by tests done by more independent individuals. The problem is, even when they're not trying to lie to the public about the radiation levels around this, they're making up some bullshit story now too about how, oh, it's only I think it was a third of a square mile area that's contaminated in the water around the plant. Everything else is fine. And by the way, this water we're flushing into the ocean, it can be considered rainwater because its radioactivity level is below background levels. You'd have to be kind of foolish to trust them at this point. They've repeatedly lied. And again, even when they're not lying, they're using substandard instrumentation that's not properly measuring the level of radioactivity. Now, what can we say? Yes, during the middle of a typhoon, with 3 inches of rain an hour, or some insane amount coming down out of the sky, and with wind gusts up to 100 miles per hour, they had individuals out there running proper scientific tests on this storage tank area water. I don't think so. And let's not forget, the total content, and oh, that's just the cat. The total content of radioactivity at that site that they were pumping into the ocean is diluted by that rainwater. But the total content of radioactive material does not change just because it's diluted. It just becomes more dilute. If you take a pound of poison that would kill hundreds of people, and you put it in a 1,000-gallon tank of water and stir it around, the same amount of poison is still there, it's just more diluted. So yeah, somebody might be able to take a glass of that and not die. They might just, vomit all over themselves, but the same amount of poison with the same toxicity is still there. Dilution does work. The problem being the actual radioactive content only seemed lower because there was so much rainwater accumulating in that area. It's still radioactive. They dumped 1,000 tons of supposedly diluted material, and that's assuming we take them at face value and say, well, yeah, I'm sure that this time, unlike every other time, we can trust their readings. Now there's steam coming again from Reactor 3, the one that keeps sending off steam for no apparent reason over and over again intermittently and has for years. They can't figure out why, or they can't tell us why. They said, well, it's just humidity. Oh, it has to do with atmospheric conditions. The problem being this latest batch of steam comes as the humidity was actually for that area relatively low, yet it's still pumping off a thick billowing cloud of steam from the top of this reactor, and nobody can tell us exactly why. That makes me suspicious. When they're either unwilling or unable, these are supposed to be experts. You would hope that any company running a nuclear plant has a good number of experts that are overseeing things at that plant. You would hope that they would understand, even in a situation like this where there's been a meltdown in the past and the whole area is damaged, you would hope they know what they're talking about and they have a lid on what's going on. That's obviously not the case. They're either lying to people or covering this up in some way, or they literally don't have a clue what's going on. I don't know which could be worse. Which is worse, that they would lie to people and they would say, well, it's nothing, don't worry about it, and it turns out it's actually something they just can't fix because they don't have the money or the technology, or the area is too compromised or something, or the other opportunity for an explanation is simply they don't have a clue. Either one is very worrying when you really think about it. This site has been, you look at the latest satellite imagery of this site, the damage is catastrophic. Things look to be falling apart even worse than they were to begin with. Things look like they're degrading fairly rapidly. When you have that level of radioactivity, you've got this already damaged area that there's no maintenance going on inside the buildings. Things corrode. The ground is becoming more and more inundated with water. They can claim that they pumped out all of this water as it was coming down and that, oh, the site's not compromised. The amount of rain that comes down during a tropical storm in an area like that, which again anecdotally is mountainous like Vermont, we saw the damage from Irene that was resulting. That's already caused landslides, it's already causing deaths, and homes were destroyed during this typhoon. You would think that that would make the ground even more soggy than it already was. There's talk about, well, we'll just pump the water out. Yeah, the groundwater is all contaminated. There was another situation, and I don't know the status of this at all, at the Monju plant, which is on the other side of Japan. A landslide blocked the road. This is really stupid, there's only one road in and out of this nuclear plant. It's an experimental plant that's only actually functioned for a very small ratio of its actual lifespan, because it's already had repeated problems too, just like Fukushima. It's a sodium-cooled fast reactor. It uses sodium instead of borated water to cool these rods. Sodium being corrosive, sodium being, explosive depending on conditions. And the plant's transmitter went offline during the typhoon after this landslide blocked the road. So for all we know, that one could go off. This other plant could melt down at any time, and we're not sure. Judging from their reaction to Fukushima being so belated and being so haphazard, you've got to wonder if that's not going to happen. What would happen if a second plant in Japan were to melt down and blanket the rest of the country that's not already affected by moderate doses of radiation? What if it were to spew out radiation too? What would happen to Japan? These poor people, 127 million people living in this country, with a government that doesn't know what's going on or doesn't care, with people that are lying to the population. There was a report a while ago that one of these nuclear officials told people that drinking beer would prevent them from getting radiation poisoning. How crazy and how stupid can these people be? The only explanation for this type of irrational behavior and this level of corruption is that they either don't know what to expect and the prospects look bleak, or they know what to expect and the prospects are truly bleak. As in, yeah, by the way, there's no way we can actually remove these fuel rods. And there is Gunderson, who's a nuclear expert, and some people have labeled him as alarmist. Only time will tell whether his predictions are accurate. Has said that the boron sheaths that are around these rods that are supposed to prevent them from going critical when they come close to one another, that these boron sheaths have basically disintegrated, and that they're borating the water in the cooling areas, because if they don't, then they'll go critical also. The problem being, if they try to remove these rods, they lift it out of the borated water, what happens then? Will they still be in close enough proximity to one another to, go critical? Not sure. It could be this way, that the situation has become so bleak, and that these people aren't stupid. Let's assume for a minute that the people at TEPCO aren't stupid and do know what's going on. It could be that things are so bleak and so likely to spiral out of control, causing further meltdowns, that they've sort of resigned themselves to that fact, and they're sort of trying to keep the public from rioting. That they're more worried about this kind of civil unrest that would occur if they were to tell people the truth about the situation than if they were to keep doing what they're doing and hope against hope that they get it just right so that the problem is solved. And have that, whatever percentage risk that there'll be further meltdowns. That's the really scary part. It almost looks like they've lost hope at TEPCO, and they're stalling for time. They're essentially trying to keep things from going critical at this moment. Maybe they're delaying it for the Olympics. That'd be a long time to delay it for. honestly, I don't know how they're going to solve this problem. And when you have these officials coming out and saying, oh, beer and being happy prevent radiation poisoning. Oh, we don't know why the plant's steaming. I'm sure it's nothing. It's just humidity. Oh, well, by the way, we're going to try to lift these fuel rods out with manual cranes. Don't worry, though, folks. Everything will be fine. And when you've got all the mainstream media sources, here's the real thing. When all the mainstream media sources in the Western world are more or less unified on a story, regardless of their partisan bickering, you know something's wrong. When all of them, if they're all telling basically the same story and they're all saying, don't worry about this radiation, that's when you have to start to worry. Because normally they can't agree on anything. The only answer being they were paid off or threatened or something along those lines. That's, of course, the weakness of having a free media, is they're free to take money from businesses and then report the bottom line for that business. And also, here's the other thing. Where are all these environmentalist groups? They should, save the whale, Greenpeace and PETA and all these other groups. Save the whales, save the fish, save the tree frog, save whatever creature, stop polluting, all of these things. Why are they not up in arms? I've heard absolutely nothing from anybody in any of these environmentalist groups. Could it be that nuclear power is sort of their wet dream just because it's not a fossil fuel? And that they don't have even a rudimentary understanding of the fact that uranium mining and processing all of these nuclear materials requires fossil fuel to do in the first place? That it exploits people in the third world who then have to turn around and eat bushmeat, dead chimpanzees or elephants or whatever they can get their hands on because they're too fucking poor to afford standard qualities in their food? Could it be that this is the case, that these people are just so fucking retarded and dumb and don't know have a clue what's going on? I would say that's the case. Because these people should be up in arms. There's radiation leaking into the Pacific Ocean. And they're saying nothing. And the mainstream media is saying nothing. And the Japanese government swears it's safe. And the fact that and you can look on YouTube and see videos of this, people taking radiation readings of rain that fell after Fukushima, when the bubble of radioactive material was over them in the atmosphere, and they're getting readings that are way above what they should be, way above background, and yet nobody's concerned about this. Not a peep from the mainstream media. I think there's been like 2 stories on Huffington Post, and Russia Today runs a few op-eds. That's about as far as they'll go. CNN ignores it, and Fox ignores it, and even sites like The Guardian ignore it. The sites that are supposed to ostensibly, libertarian leaning, or they support, private action by individuals and activist movements, and they say absolutely nothing. How much money had to be circulated around for all of these people not to even mention the story? Even if they won't even mention, oh, by the way, you shouldn't worry about it. They're just not running anything. None of these media sites care. You hear nothing from our politicians. There are a very small number of politicians right now that even want to tackle the issue. Nuclear power is one of those issues that a lot of people have difficulty from the places that they're at in DC talking about, because here's the thing. Nuclear power is sort of the meeting point where the more regulated corporate industries and the environmental activists actually agree on. They shouldn't. It's the most unwise way to make these two things fuse. They should be using other energy sources. Natural gas is a good alternative, even though it can require fracking. Solar and wind, all of these things that have been used successfully for decades. And yet, because it's nuclear power, the environmentalists label it clean energy, which it's not, clearly, because there's radiation leaking into the Pacific Ocean right now and the threat of another meltdown. And the corporations love it because, oh, well, we get to exploit the third world just like we were buying oil. And, oh, look at how wonderful it is. We can create a fission in these reactors and we can power entire cities off of this small reactor. And they love it. And it makes no sense. Peace out.